Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Gwei Refuel, where I recap the latest news in the Ethereum ecosystem. I'm your host, Anthony Sassano, and it's the 10th of October, 2023. Alright everyone, let's get into it. So apologies for not doing an episode yesterday, it just kind of ran out of time and wasn't able to do one, but I'm back today of course, and there's a bunch of things to get through, mostly all kind of Ethereum core dev related actually, which is pretty cool because it all goes back to the discussions around staking and Lido and all that sort of stuff. Obviously the stuff that Eric and I covered on the drive-through episode that came out on the weekend. If you listened to that one there, that was a pretty good episode. We got a lot of great feedback on that. But to kick us off today, I'm going to start with a tweet thread here from Christine Kim, who updated us on the latest all-core devs call. So really, I guess the meat of this update is an update on when Devnet 10 will be launching for Dencun. Now, she says here, on the timing for the launch of Devnet 10, not all developers were confident that the next Devnet could be launched in the next 2 weeks. So this is from October 7th. So I guess next 2 weeks being up to October 22nd or 23rd or so, especially given the fact that client teams are still discovering and resolving bugs on Devnet 9. So this speaks to the larger trend over the last maybe month or so where I basically said to you guys that Dencun is definitely not going to happen this year now. It's going to happen probably early next year, and that's simply because testing is taking longer than anticipated because 4844 is quite a big change to the network, and the testing has uncovered a bunch of bugs. Obviously, they need to get squashed, but also performance-related things as well, because obviously there is still a worry amongst the core developers that too many validators were added too quickly on the network, and that's why we did that other EIP that's coming in Dencun, the churn limit cap, right? Even though that the staking queue right now is almost empty. I don't know if you guys have been paying attention to it, but I believe there is less than 3,000 validators left on the queue. So yeah, pretty much almost empty, which is good to see, obviously from a network health perspective as well. I think that there is definitely diminishing returns to adding more validators at this point. I think that what I would like to see is maybe the same amount of validators, but just shuffled around. And I'll talk more about that more about that later when I talk about all the Lido stuff. But yeah, that's the meat of this update here, is that we can probably expect Devnet 10 maybe hopefully towards the end of the month and into November, and then hopefully we still get that first testnet launched in like mid to late November there, first testnet fork in mid to late November there. But really, at the end of the day, as I said to you guys, Dencun is not happening till probably Jan-Feb at this stage. I'll keep you guys updated on timing around that. But that was the meat of this kind of thread here, and Christine Kim gives a bit more information as well, which you can check out. We'll link it in the YouTube description below for you to do so. Right, obviously the talk of the town lately being maybe the last couple months especially, has been all about staking, and specifically staking centralization, or kind of like Lido's dominance on the Ethereum network. And there's been a bunch of podcasts, there's been a bunch of debates, there's been a bunch of blog posts written about this. But two that I wanted to focus on in particular was from Vitalik and Mike Nuda here. Now, these two are relatively recent posts. I mean, they just came out over the last few days, but I think they really cover all the bases, so to speak, right? And obviously, as I said, I did an episode on this with Eric Connor over the weekend where we talked a lot about Lido, stake centralization, what the actual issues are, how they can be rectified, what the kind of state of play is right now, all that sorts of stuff. So if you haven't listened to that episode yet, I highly recommend doing so. But the first blog post here is from Vitalik, and this post is less about, I guess, the current kind of, or what the current staking ecosystem looks like, and more about what we can actually change at the protocol in order to improve the Ethereum proof of stake protocol. Now, this is titled Protocol and Staking Pool Changes That Could Improve Decentralization and Reduce Consensus Overhead. Now, obviously, I highly recommend checking this blog post out for yourself, but it fits into the same theme as what has become known as two-tiered staking. So Vitalik defines this as there being a staking model where there are two classes of participants, those two participants being node operators and delegators. Now, obviously, we already have that within Ethereum today. You have the node operators, the solo validators, the rocket pool node operators, the Lido node operators, and then you have the delegators, right? The people who delegate their stake to one of these node operators, whether it's a centralized exchange or rocket pool or Lido, they're delegating their stake. Now, this is not done in protocol. This is done extra protocol, right? Because Ethereum is not a delegated proof of stake. It doesn't have delegated proof of stake as its consensus mechanism. It just has this stuff built on top. Now, of course, there was a lot of talk about potentially enshrining this at the base layer, but there are trade-offs there. So Vitalik's come up with this it's not like a change that is probably going to go into the protocol, but he's come up with a bunch of ideas around how we could actually do a kind of hybrid delegation within Ethereum where node operators still have to post collateral, still have a risk of obviously getting slashed and all that, but delegators have a much easier time of moving their delegated stake around. So I think one idea in here was that basically, you wouldn't need to go through the exit queue if you wanted to redelegate your stake to someone else or to some other kind of, I guess, staking service out there. That could just happen not instantly, but like on a much shorter time frame. So basically, bringing down the costs of those switching costs there. And then he also compared things in the blog post, like basically the cost to attack. And this is what I was talking about before, where we're kind of at this diminishing returns, where adding more validators isn't really adding more security to the network. So the main focus should be on obviously making sure that the node operators are as distributed and decentralized as possible, so that no one node operator or no one kind of like governance umbrella on top of node operators, like Lido, for example, has too much power in the network here. But yeah, that's kind of like the high level stuff there. And there's much more in this post, but I'll let you go read this post for yourself if you haven't yet. But my general thoughts on this from what I've read and comments that I've read and discussions that I've had with people is that I think people read this and they took this to mean that this is what's actually going to happen in Ethereum proof of stake. These are the changes that are going to be implemented. That's not how you should read this. This is basically just a blog post that Vitalik has put out with a bunch of ideas that people can begin to discuss and begin to talk about and begin to maybe potentially create something workable that actually goes into the protocol eventually. But in no way are any of these ideas in Vitalik's blog post even being considered right now for inclusion in the protocol. They are just ideas. And I think that I got a little bit frustrated reading people's comments because people were acting like that, this is new. This is the new Ethereum proof of stake. This is what we're going to work towards. And they were getting kind of some people that I know were getting kind of upset about it because they're like, oh, is this Ethereum abandoning its current proof of stake design for a more, I guess, like delegated proof of stake design? And that's not what it is at all. As I said, this document alone is just a bunch of ideas, but even the ideas in this document don't propose moving Ethereum to delegated proof of stake like you see on other chains. It proposes a new and novel and kind of like hybrid approach to it, where essentially we still get the properties of Ethereum proof of stake as it exists today, while also removing kind of, I guess, the security and decentralization concerns around the delegation of stake, right? So anyway, you can go give this blog post a read for yourself. I'll link it in the YouTube description below. Now, following off of this was another post that Mike Nutter put out over the week. Actually, he put this out yesterday, I believe, or today even, depending where you are in the world. But this blog post, I think, is probably the best thing that you will ever read, at least that has been published to date, about Lido and about what the actual attack vectors are. You guys know that I've been complaining for a little while now that much of the Lido criticism never actually details what the attack vectors are. It's just Lido's at 32%, that's bad, we need to get Lido down, which is fine. Like, I don't think that's necessarily a kind of like a wrong thing to say. But for the everyday person, they see that and they're like, okay, why is it bad? Like, what can Lido do? What's the attack vectors here? And Mike Nutter's post here honestly is amazing, and you should definitely go read it if you haven't yet. I'll link it in the YouTube description below, but it is very comprehensive. And even if you don't want to read the whole post, you can scroll to the bottom and there's a TLDR at the bottom of what the kind of 5 shades of gray of Lido look like, as Mike calls it here, where there are different kind of vectors that people think that can be launched as used as an attack, and then on the right-hand side of it, why Lido would do this, and then the reality is in the middle. Because I've always said that, where there's a lot of nuance here, where people say, oh, well, Lido is only composed of 30 node operators. If they collude, they can attack the network. Okay, but there are consequences for that. And also, to get 30 node operators, it's actually going to be 37 soon, by the way, but to get them to collude is really difficult to begin with, right? So you need to basically qualify these statements. You can't just say something and then assume that everyone knows what you mean by it. You actually have to qualify it. And that's why this post is so good, because it doesn't just go over node operator attacks or potential attacks. It goes over governance attacks as well. It goes over things like what the I guess like optics look like too, because this is something that Eric discussed in particular over the weekend that I don't think is as important as the other stuff, but it's still important where like the optics are just bad. When someone says, "Oh well, Lido controls 32% of the validators on Ethereum," from an optics perspective, yeah, okay, that doesn't look great, right? But if you actually dig into it and dig into the nuance, it's a lot more nuanced than just that. But again, most people won't do that. So from an optics standpoint, it does lower probably Ethereum's kind of like credible neutrality and decentralization in some people's eyes. But if you actually read this post from Mike and understand all the nuance, you know that one, an attack is really difficult to pull off for Lido. Two, it doesn't really benefit them in most scenarios, right? Three, they're actually not just one monolithic entity. Yes, the governance is quite centralized, and probably the governance vectors are the most concern for attack here. But the governance itself can't force node operators to do anything. It can put pressure on them, but it can't actually technically force them to do anything. So that's another bit of nuance there. And this is all stuff that Eric and I discussed, obviously, on the podcast as well. But Mike just basically puts it into a very, very nice blog post that you can send to people. Basically, this is why I love blog posts like this, because you can send these to people and you can basically say, hey, this is the state of Lido. This is what's up with Lido. Especially if they ask for, I guess, more clarification around it, because they probably see people on Twitter and on YouTube saying, Lido's got this massive share of the network. It's bad for Ethereum for such and such reason, but they want to dive deeper. They want to understand, okay, why is this bad for Ethereum? What are the attack vectors? What are the chances of these attack vectors? What is the damage done here? And so on and so forth. And even Mike in his post, I believe, says that really the, I guess, riskiest thing about Lido's dominance and like the worst thing about it is the LDO token governance. Yeah, because the LDO token has an atrocious distribution. It is incredibly centralized, which means the governance is incredibly centralized, which means that any power that LDO token holders have over Lido is basically de facto, in my mind, centralized power. Now, thankfully, right now, as I said, the token holders do not have the power to force node operators to do anything technically. They can force it via social pressure, which is a lot harder than actually just forcing it via a technical change. And there are a few other things that LDO holders can do, or LDO governance can do, but there's nuance off that as well, where there is a committed roadmap from Lido. Whether they deliver on this or not is another thing, but there is a committed roadmap that they've put out where they're basically trying to take away power from governance, so that governance really just becomes this dumb thing where maybe it just ends up being the thing that polices the addition and removal of node operators based purely on technical merit, not based on anything except, is this node operator actually performing, or are they shutting down because they've been forced to, right? So in the US, maybe you get shut down because you're forced to and you're not allowed to run this product anymore. Stuff like that, right? More of a administrative task rather than a how can we leverage our centralized power in order to profit from it kind of thing, right? So essentially just taking away that vector there. But anyway, I won't bore you anymore with my takes on this. You can go give this blog post a read for yourself. I'll link it in the YouTube description below for you to do so. And actually, the last thing I'll say on this in particular is that commonly what we want to achieve in Ethereum and what we want to achieve with basically everything that takes advantage of the Ethereum network is a symbiotic relationship, right? And this is what was so special about EIP 1559, is it created a symbiotic relationship between the applications that use the chain and the ETH holders, where the ETH holders benefit because ETH is burnt, and the applications that use the chain pay, obviously the users still pay the fees, but they also get a better user experience with 1559, and then most of that fees is burnt, which obviously benefits ETH holders, which are the ones securing the network to begin with, and providing this infrastructure for people to use the applications. So when it comes to Ethereum staking, and when it comes to different entities having different market shares, we want them to have symbiotic relationships. But the problem is that some of them can get to the point where they're parasites. And when they get to the point where they're parasites, that's where it becomes a problem for not just the Ethereum network itself from a technical standpoint, but from a social standpoint. And I think a lot of people believe right now that Lido is not in a symbiotic relationship with Ethereum. It is a parasite on Ethereum because its stated goals is to grow as big as possible. And and that is not a symbiotic relationship, because in a symbiotic relationship, you don't have the stated goal of growing as big as possible. You have the stated goal of making sure that you remain in symbiosis with the thing on the other side, basically the host, essentially, right? Whereas a parasite is not concerned with that. A parasite just wants to grow at the cost of the host. It doesn't want to live in symbiosis. It wants to basically drain the host for everything that it's got for its own benefit. So a lot of people view Lido like that. And you know what? They've stated that their goal is to grow as big as possible. And honestly, I can see why people believe that it's a parasite because of that. And I don't necessarily disagree with that. But that's why I've also said in the past that more competition will actually stunt Lido's growth, which it actually has for the last 15 or so months, and reduce it too. And I strongly believe that will be the case forever, basically. I don't think that social pressure alone is enough. Social pressure without action is pointless. If the social pressure leads to action, that is what's most important. And that, I think, is exactly what there are different protocols are doing now. I mean, I have a tweet up here from Superfizz. He shared an ETH Finance post that he made where he basically said that he's very committed to this vampire attack that Diva is doing. And I've talked about this before, about how they're taking in STETH, and then once they launch the Diva protocol, they'll automatically swap that out for their own LST here. But it's not just supporting Diva; it's supporting every staking protocol out there that is committed to decentralization. Obviously, right now there are centralized exchanges that have market share and that have less market share than Lido, but there are arguments on that side as well. People say, well, is it better to stake with Lido or is it better to stake with a centralized exchange? Because with a centralized exchange, it's literally just them. It's not 30 different node operators, right? There's not much nuance there. Really, it's just them. And they, especially Coinbase, with their validators, is based in the US, which is even worse, because what if they're forced to do something malicious, right? So really, we want to just be, especially the smaller protocols, we want to be encouraging people to use them, no matter what they are, whether it's Diva or Swell or Stakewise or Rocket Pool, of course, but any of these ones that are committed to being decentralized, to making sure that they're not basically becoming a parasite on Ethereum and want to be in a symbiotic relationship with Ethereum, is the stuff that we should definitely be focused on, at least in my view here. Now, speaking of Coinbase and their stake, Hill Dobby actually was able to unveil that Coinbase has a lot more ETH stake with them than previously thought. So Rated.network still shows Coinbase at around 9% of market share here, but according to Hill Dobby, Coinbase actually has 14.1% of market share. So they have 14.1% of all staked ETH on the network. Now, I wasn't exactly surprised by this, to be honest, considering that Coinbase has notoriously been hard to track even on chain and track their activity on chain. But also, as I mentioned on the podcast with Eric, Coinbase right now, if you're a US person or even a European person or anywhere where Coinbase is by far the easiest way to stake your ETH. It's even easier than Lido. So their market share does not surprise me at all in this respect. Yeah. In saying that, I believe Coinbase has actually been going down since withdrawals. So I think it was up at maybe 16 or 17%, factoring in their market share at time of withdrawals. So it's gone down by 2 to 3% here, which is great to see, obviously. Because we don't want any centralized exchanges to have large market shares either. I mean, I'm honestly on the side of, I would rather have Lido at probably what they are right now than have a centralized exchange anywhere near that. Because as I said before, at least with Lido, and I know there are still concerns around this, and I'm not trying to sugarcoat anything here, but at least with Lido, you have the separate node operators, right? With Coinbase, you have one node operator. That's Coinbase. They have 14.1%. The largest market share that a Lido node operator has is, I think, 1.6%. I think it's all equal, and that actually goes down over time as more node operators are added. So if we're talking about the hierarchy of what's good and what's bad, I still consider centralized exchanges the worst to stake with from a decentralization perspective, right? Because they are always going to be one node operator, whether it's Binance or Coinbase or Kraken, they are all under one entity, they are all under one company. Whereas with Lido, yes, there is that governance concern, and I'm not trying to minimize that, but in terms of the actual node operator set behind it, Lido is a million times better than these centralized exchanges. And obviously Rocket Pool is even better than that, because Rocket Pool has many more node operators than even Lido does here. But again, there's nuance there because within Rocket Pool, there is the issue of people not wanting to take on RPL price risk in order to have to spin up node operators, and that's being addressed in in order to spin up mini pools, and that's being addressed in some future upgrades for Rocket Pool. And as I've mentioned before, there are other protocols coming online that are not going to require those sorts of things, and they're going to be doing it in various different ways. So yeah, this is all coming together, but I think that outside of Lido, the next biggest concern is obviously centralized exchanges. And in my mind, a centralized exchange is worse than Lido. I know that might not be a popular opinion with people, but in my mind, a centralized exchange is definitely worse than Lido. In saying that, I don't think Lido should be anywhere near the market share they're at right now. Ideally, we want to get Lido down to let's say in a realistic world, we want to get it down to 25% in the next 12 to 18 months or something like that. Because as I've said before, it is a slow moving ship when it comes to Ethereum staking. It's not going to happen overnight. But the fact that we've actually been able to slow or basically stop Lido's market share growth, yes, they're still getting more stake in, but their actual relative market share growth has completely stopped over the last 15 months because they were at 32% in May of last year and they're at 32% right now. So when you look at that, okay, we've stopped them. So let's get the engines running on actively taking away their market share and making it so that they are down to 25% and then hopefully down to 20% and then hopefully down lower than that. But it is an uphill battle. It is a long-term battle. It's not going to happen overnight, but we're going to see how that goes there. And also, what's critically important to this as well, and last thing I'll say on this, is that we don't want Lido's market share going down just because centralized exchange market share is going up. We ideally want Lido's market share going down because these other smaller protocols, especially the decentralized ones, are growing, right? Like Rocket Pool and Diva and all the others that I mentioned before, and Swell and Stakewise, and so many others. We would rather those grow and take away from Lido than Coinbase and Binance grow and take away from Lido. Kraken's very small right now, so I'm not too concerned about Kraken, to be honest. The most concerning is Coinbase, but even then, like, there's still nuance that falls off of that, right? Where Coinbase is definitely very Ethereum aligned as an organization. There's no rational reason for them to attack the network or anything like that, or to leverage their power here. And some people will argue that Coinbase actually doesn't even need to leverage their staked ETH power. They actually have more power because they are, I guess, like, they're not technically the owners of USDC, right? But they are very closely tied with USDC. And people believe that, well, the stablecoins actually have a stronger say than the stakers do. I don't necessarily agree with that, but yeah, I mean, there's also that aspect to it as well there. But anyway, you can go check out Hill Dobby's tweet thread about this here. Good uncovering from him. I'll link it in the YouTube description below for you to check out. Now, falling off of all of this, Anders Ellerson here, who works basically in the economics research field at the Ethereum Foundation here, has put together a 118 tweet thread all about Ethereum's monetary policy and potential changes we can make in order to basically make proof of stake Ethereum as secure, decentralized, and resilient as possible, while keeping ETH as the base money of Ethereum rather than the base money becoming some kind of LST. Now, you don't have to read it on Twitter. There's actually a blog post that he did where he basically just took all his tweets and put it in this blog post. So, of course, I'll link this in the YouTube description below for you to check out. Now, because there are so many tweets here, it's hard for me to really focus on any one thing that he spoke about, but I will focus on the high level, which is the term that he used, which is minimum viable issuance. Now, a lot of you may not know this, but this is Ethereum's unofficial, I guess, monetary policy, and this term was coined all the way back in, I believe, 2019. I believe ETHUB coined this term, to be honest, me and Eric and a bunch of others that were contributing to ETHUB at the time. And what this basically means is that the Ethereum network should only issue the minimum amount of ETH it needs to secure itself, basically. And that's why it's called minimum viable issuance. And we actually had this policy in proof of work where we changed the block reward from 5 ETH to 3 ETH and then to 2 ETH because the ETH price went up, obviously, and we were overpaying for security by a large margin. And then we obviously collapsed the rewards under proof of stake by 90%. At the time of the merge. And this tweet thread that was put together by Anders goes even more into, I guess, like what the monetary policy can be changed to in order to still adhere to minimum viable issuance, but make it fair for everyone. Now, warning here, there is a lot of math in this tweet thread. There is a lot to unpack in it, honestly. I'm still digesting it. I'm still going through it and reading it back and forth here, but as I said, the general gist of it is to make sure that we can achieve a kind of, I guess, symbiotic relationship between issuance of ETH, ETH staking, and ETH as a money here. So you can go check this out. I'll link it in the YouTube description below for you to do so. All right, so we have Ethereum.org's Q4 2023 product roadmap, which is now out on GitHub. So I cover this every quarter that they basically put this together. But if you are interested in getting involved with the Ethereum.org initiative here and contributing to it, well, you can go check out their roadmap, what they're going to be working on in Q4. So here they basically say they are working on redesigning their navigation, redesigning parts of the website here. They're going to be doing a Find Wallets design improvements as well, seed phrase page, Dencun content updates, of course, and 2024 road mapping and budget, and much more. So you can go check out this little GitHub note here, which I'll link in the YouTube description below. But Ethereum.org has a lot of contributors, guys. Like, it's actually pretty crazy how many contributors they have, considering that it may be like a really insider baseball Ethereum thing to contribute to the Ethereum.org website, right? But if you actually go here, you can see they have 1,363 contributors on their GitHub. Now, of course, not every contributor is going to be as active as every other one, but if you click into the contributors section, you can actually see which ones are active, how active they are, when they've been active, stuff like that. And a lot of them have been active different periods of time, which is actually pretty healthy to see, because it means they contributed in their own way, and that's all they needed to do. They don't need to become full-time contributors, right? They can contribute in their own way, make their impact, and then move on, which is what the majority of people do, of course. And then you have like the top communities up here, which of course are probably the kind of like what you consider the core team of Ethereum.org, especially the ones that work out of the Ethereum Foundation here. But yeah, that's just amazing to see for a kind of like open source a website here, or I guess like an open contribution website here for Ethereum. Having that many contributors is a sight to behold. So yeah, anyway, I'll link this Q4 roadmap in the YouTube description below for you to check out. All right, so ZeroX Designer has a really great little tweet video here where he's teased something that I've been talking about for a little while. So he captioned this with, "Prove you meet the requirements of a rent application without sharing any personal information with zero knowledge." And as you can see here, this is what it might look like when you're applying for a rental. You can show them your proof of funds and your credit score, but they don't actually know what your proof of funds is and what your credit score is. All they know is that your credit score matches what they want, and your proof of funds matches the minimum what they want as well in terms of kind of rent here, right? So this to me is the future of KYC and AML and all this kind of stuff around identity, because there should not be a world that we live in where essentially your identity and all of your personal information is just stored on centralized databases that are constantly hacked, constantly leaked, where your most sensitive information is leaked, right? Like your passport details, your home address, your kind of like crypto addresses as well, so, and your email addresses, so people can do targeted phishing attacks towards you, all that sorts of stuff. Like, it's just insane, right? So doing this in a privacy preserving way using ZK, where you can still have those cryptographic guarantees that no one's fudging the system, even though you don't have direct access to their data, is exactly what we want to see in this world. And this is one of the non-financial use cases of crypto that I think is going to have the biggest worldwide impact. It's going to take a while though, because obviously this space generally is pretty slow moving, because identity is a very sensitive thing, and these are obviously very sensitive details, and we have to convince pretty much like potentially millions of different kind of, I guess, state governments and councils around the world to implement this sorts of stuff. But I do think that this is the end game for, I guess, KYC and AML and sharing information and stuff like that, because it does it in a privacy preserving way while still guaranteeing that you meet the requirements that has been set for something like a rental application. And I'm really, really bullish on this technology, and I've talked about it a lot before, but this little video from ZeroX Designer, which I'll link in the YouTube description below, shows this nicely and shows what this could actually look like, and shows how simple it can be as well. And it can all be secured by Face ID, right? On your iPhone, or by whatever Android users, so that you basically have this on a secure chip, a secure enclave, and it's all just secured on your own device. No need to store this data on centralized databases that are hacked all the time. You just need this ZK proof or this zero knowledge proof to prove this to your counterparty, and away you go from there. But that's really cool there. But I think that's going to be it for today, everyone. So thank you everyone for listening and watching. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the newsletter, join the Discord channel, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Thanks, everyone.